Welcome to another episode of the Counselor's Soapbox video series. Today's episode, Drug Counseling, an Introduction. What does a drug counselor actually do on the job? Their requirements include a lot more than simply listening to clients or giving advice. And this series will explore the core job functions of a drug and alcohol counselor. To be effective as a drug and alcohol counselor, you will need to develop and practice the skills that you need. Counseling is more than talking to clients or giving advice. There's a lot of paperwork to do to document what you did in counseling, and you must do the work in a legal and ethical way. To be a good or effective drug and alcohol counselor requires two separate things. Knowledge. This will include classroom work, but even after graduating, the counselor will need to do ongoing trainings, sometimes called CEUs or CEs. They also will need to work under supervision. In California, drug and alcohol counselors work for a licensed facility rather than being licensed themselves. The knowledge base also involves experience and ongoing study. A drug counselor must be able to define or explain all of the core counselor functions that they will do on the job. Besides knowledge, there's also a skill base required. That skill base will be developed in the counselor through field placements, internship, collecting hours towards registration and certification, experience, and being able to actually perform all of the core counselor functions. Many people come to the counseling professions with the mistaken belief that they would be good at it because their friends come to them to ask questions and to seek advice. Professional counseling involves a lot more than just the talking. It's not telling the client what to do or giving advice, but it does require a lot of other techniques and skills. This series of videos about drug counseling will seek to answer two different questions. In the real world, what does a counselor do, and how do they do it? One way of analyzing what it is the drug and alcohol counselor does is to divide it into four domains. This system comes from the International Consortium on Reciprocity. An individual counselor may do one or more of these domains, but a good drug counselor needs to be knowledgeable in all of these areas. The first domain is getting the client into treatment. The second is creating a blueprint for recovery. The third is the actual counseling work. And the fourth domain that a counselor must know about is doing the work legally and professionally. This involves a knowledge of law and ethics, record keeping, and the requirement for supervision. Each of these domains will be divided into multiple tasks. Some agencies or programs may assign one person to do a certain function, or one counselor may have to do all of these functions. The domain of getting the client into treatment will include four separate tasks. One is screening clients. We'll describe that in a subsequent video. The second is engaging the client in treatment. Another task in getting them into treatment is orienting them to the particular program. And lastly, assessing what is the issue with the client and what do they need to work on. The assessment done during the getting the client into treatment part of the recovery program becomes the information needed to create a blueprint for recovery. From this, a comprehensive recovery plan is developed. The beginning counselor needs to learn the ins and outs of treatment planning. That also will require them to know about collaborating with other people who will be working with the same client, and when they need to refer this client to other people or agencies for services they do not provide. There are three components to counseling which drug and alcohol counselors study in their training. One is the process of doing individual or one-on-one counseling with the client. The second is how to conduct group counseling sessions. In substance abuse recovery, group is the dominant modality. Also, drug and alcohol counselors may be required to work with, to counsel others in the client's lives. This could be family members, friends, and so on. They may also have to educate people that the client works with. All of this falls into the category of counseling others about the issues drugs and alcohol may have created in the client's life. If you expect to be paid for doing drug and alcohol counseling, and you certainly shouldn't be doing it if you're not a professional, you need to follow certain codes and guidelines. There are uniform codes of ethics. These come from the various registries and groups who train counselors, but in California, the state has gotten all of the various groups together and created a uniform code of ethics for all drug and alcohol counselors. That situation may be different in other jurisdictions. Also, there's record keeping. If someone is going to pay for drug treatment, they expect a record to be kept of that treatment and what was done. It's also an ethical concern that you document what you're doing. Counseling involves a relationship, and that raises legal issues, and another element of making it professional is the drug and alcohol counselor needs to be supervised. That supervision both oversees the work they're doing, but also trains them to be more competent over time. Learning to write good notes, sometimes called progress notes, can be a challenge. There was a time when all notes were written on paper. Increasingly, programs, counselors are using electronic systems, but there are certain minimum pieces of information which need to be included in the file. A title, what is this note? A date, the client's name, the counselor's name. The note needs to be signed and dated. It needs to include reliable information, and it may be done either written or electronically, depending on the requirements of the program the drug counselor is working in. There are a number of different formats for writing notes. People who work in different programs, sometimes within the same program for different supervisors, may have been trained in different ways of writing notes. No one of these seems to be totally inclusive, because each one uses a set of initials to remind the counselor of the things that need to be included. When you're on the job, the drug counselor will learn the specific way that the program wants it written. Electronic notes are now set up so that various fields on the note must be filled in before you can move on. But the simplest form are DAP, which asks for data about the client, your assessment, what does this data mean, and then what to plan is what do you intend to do to help the client. The SOAP note basically divides the data into two parts, subjective and objective. Interestingly, the initial reaction to subjective and objective in many counselors is that it seems backwards. The subjective part is what the client says. The objective part is what you observe or see in the client. Once you make that distinction, you get the initial information from the client, put it under the S, draw some conclusions yourself, put it under the O. Your conclusions would be how they're dressed, how they're acting, whether they seem to understand what's going on. Based on that, the client and the counselor arrive at an assessment and a plan for services. BIOP is another way of writing it. behavior, which could include what's said and what's being done. An intervention, what did the counselor do? The outcome, the result of that, and then the plan to continue treatment. BEIR, B-E-I-R, is behavior evaluation, which is very similar to the assessment, intervention, and result. This has the problem of not including the plan for continuing services, which has to be put into the result part. Many counselors in the beginning, and for certain types of issues, write basically a narrative note. Client came, they looked like this, they said that, and then this, and then that, and then I decided this, and then we created this plan, and it basically is a chronological walkthrough of the session. As long as all of the information that you need and that someone else would need when looking at the note to know what happened is included, this type of note can also be useful in certain situations. There's some things that should be avoided when writing notes. Much of drug and alcohol counseling is done in a group setting. When writing a note for one client's file, you should avoid putting in names of other clients who are present in that group. Also, avoid unclear abbreviations. You may think you know what your abbreviation means, but the next person to look at that file may not. Many agencies and programs have lists of approved abbreviations, and you're required to stick to only those abbreviations that are approved. Don't include excessive details unrelated to treatment. A client comes in and tells you that they had an argument with their significant other, and then they proceed to tell you, now she said this, and then I said that, and then she said this, and I said that. All of that detail is not important. What is important is, because of a conflict with their partner, your client experienced urges to drink or use again. And then, were they able to handle those urges, or did they give in and use? Also, avoid talking about yourself and how the client's behavior affected you. That's something for your own counseling or therapy. Limit your reaction to things that might be common if someone else were working with this very same client. How you refer to the client in the notes can vary a great deal. Different programs may have different ways they want it done, and it may depend on where you're doing the client. One way is to always use the client's name. Could be first and last or first only. You can use, in certain settings, client reported, client said. In mental health, for a while, it was common to use the term consumer, though I've noticed some of those agencies are going back to calling the person they're working with the client. You need to be careful with he, she, or they, because that can become unclear. In faith-based programs, they are sometimes referred to as beneficiaries, and in medical settings, it's common to refer to the same client as a patient. In this overview, we'll take a quick look at the process of treatment. Future videos are going to go into this process in a great many more details. But the process involves getting the client into your program, determining what does the client need, planning the treatment, managing the treatment, providing the treatment, and ending treatment. The getting the client into the program is often referred to as intake. What does the client need is usually determined by doing an assessment of some kind. Planning treatment is usually called treatment planning. Managing treatment is writing out a plan of care and then checking to see that you're following it. The providing the treatment falls under both counseling and case management tasks, and may include things like education and counseling. And ending treatment is part of the discharge function. We'll talk more about all of these various process parts of counseling as we move along. One useful way of studying what it is a drug and alcohol counselor does is to divide those functions into 12 core functions of a counselor. In fact, there's a textbook that's often used in drug and alcohol programs by that title. When you look at these as 12 different things, the tasks that a counselor may be called on to do, they come in this list. 1, screening. 2, intake. 3, orientation. 4, assessment. 5, treatment planning. And step 6, the counseling. The rest of the core functions of a counselor would include case management, crisis intervention, client education, which could include both your clients in your program and their families and even the community, referrals, reports and record keeping, and consultation, which is the process of going to others, psychiatrists, family members, etc., to get information or advice about how to help this client. It's important not to confuse consultation with the process of supervision. Most drug and alcohol counselors do not work independently. They work in an agency where they are supervised. The supervision is about the counselor learning to do the work better. The consultation is about getting information to help serve one particular client in a more efficient manner. There are a number of other things that a drug and alcohol counselor will need to know. One is the code of ethics. The other is laws as it applies to counseling. Drug and alcohol counselors are mandated reporters, and they need to know what that means and when they can break confidentiality to make a mandated report and when they can't. They also may be required to have a knowledge of legal holds, sometimes called involuntary commitments. It's rare that a drug and alcohol counselor will be able to place anyone on a hold, but they need to know what to do if someone were to become suicidal or homicidal, and how involuntary treatment might work. Also, drug counselors need to know the current status of various laws that regulate the use and abuse of drugs and alcohol. They also need to know a lot about the world of work, not only their own job duties, but the potential jobs that their clients might be seeking when they leave. Drug and alcohol counseling can be very stressful, and a counselor needs to really know a lot about self-care for themselves, some of which they pass on to their clients. They also need to have a lot of specific information about various drugs of abuse, how they affect the body, and how they may impact the client's recovery. What's ahead for the Counselor's Soapbox video channel? More in our Learning About Drug Counseling series, more drug education videos, and a series on mental health and wellness. If you've enjoyed this video, please click the like button directly below. For more information, please visit the CounselorSoapbox.com blog, where you will find articles on mental health, substance abuse, and having a happy life. The David Joel Miller fiction and nonfiction books are available on Amazon.